So, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Christopher Snyder, and I build AI automations and workflows for businesses. And for today's video, what we're going to be hopping into is a little bit of a unique workflow. Now, I haven't seen a lot of workflows, if any, of this kind of specific workflow on YouTube, but I wanted to think a little bit outside of the box because I do have some workflows and automations on my channel that are kind of like, a bit, I don't want to say saturated by any means, but I try to build them in my own, unique way so I can literally provide as much value to these specific workflows as possible. But for today's video, I wanted to hop a little bit outside of that box. And I wanted to go into a workflow that is of really, really high value, but is just very unique and haven't seen a lot of videos on this. But basically, this is going to be a competitive intelligence workflow. It's basically going to scrape data from your competitors within your specific business niche, and it's going to take that data, and you will have all your data for whichever companies are within your niche and with whichever competitors you do have. So without further ado, let's hop into this workflow. So heading into this workflow here, so we have our initial trigger set up for a schedule for every 6 hours. And like I said, you can obviously, set this initial trigger up as you want. And one thing I will say as well is make sure you do pay attention to your initial triggers whenever you are implementing these workflows and automations as well. It is very important. So if you do have, API keys functions within your specific workflow or automation, it's just very essential that, you are paying attention to your initial scheduling trigger at first, just so you don't over exceed your API key usage. So I just wanted to put that out there. Just like really do pay attention to your initial trigger for the scheduling at least. So just do pay attention for that. But moving on to the next step, so we have our configuration variables. And what this is going to do is it's basically going to, if you have any competitor website URLs that you do know of, you basically can store it inside of this variables function. And so obviously, say you're within a pet niche, for example, you can also have it store like specific keywords within your specific niche as well. So, before you do go off into these three other branches within this specific workflow, then it has basically what you're looking for. So it has the competitor website URLs, it has the specific keywords within your niche. So this is basically just going to be, this storing basically of, of what the workflow is just, looking for and the data that it needs before it does go, to these next steps and processes within the specific workflow. But then going on to initialize variables, basically this is just going to be the storing for basically the data that was previously inputted into the configuration variables. So like I said, before it does go off into these three separate branches, this is just basically going to be the storing base for the previous variables that you did have implemented into the configuration variables. So heading into the next step of this workflow here. So we have three different branches within this workflow, but I'm gonna just work my way from the top branch all the way down to the bottom branch, and then we're gonna move on to like the last final segment. So we're just gonna start with the top branch here. So the first step in this top branch function, so we have our split competitor URLs, but this is basically just a loop function. So what it's going to do is it's going to go through each competitor website URL just one at a time until all of the competitor URLs are ran through. So it can then move on to the next step of our process. And this is going to fetch the competitor's page. But what this is going to do specifically is I have it programmed specifically so it goes to that specific pricing page. So whichever page within that specific competitor website URL does have the pricing for its products, it's basically going to download the specific HTML code that is needed from that specific website URL. So it can then move on to our next step, and it's going to be this JavaScript function. And what this is going to do is it's going to extract and then analyze the prices. So it's going to take that downloaded HTML code, like I said earlier, and that's what's going to be responsible for extracting that price data from that specific website URL, and then it's just going to analyze that specific data from that pricing page. And like I said, so that's the way I have it programmed. You can do it in some other specific ways, but it was just the simplest and easiest process for me to have it in the first place. But then so I have it then set to this if function, so price extraction price extraction success function, and basically if it does find the prices from that specific website URL, it's then going to be stored within this PostgreSQL database, and this is basically going to be responsible for storing that price data from all of the specific competitor website URLs. And then if there wasn't any prices found within that specific website, then it's going to go into this log extraction error function, and basically it's just going to log, the specific website, and just, have a warning that, or for whichever reason, whether it's like it was an invalid website or there just wasn't any pricing on that specific website, that's just going to log that extraction error. So heading on to the middle branch now. So our first step within our middle branch is going to be this prepare search queries function. And basically what you need to do here to at least input this into the search queries is basically list your brand name, for example, also your competitor's name, and then also list keywords like news, discussions, like industry, or like industry reviews or industry news, for example, and just have specific keywords like your specific brand, competitors, the name of your specific niche that you operate in. So basically, you can have this data inputted into this query, so it can then move on to the next step. And so basically, this step is going to be a loop function that basically goes through all the queries that you previously inputted into the prepare search queries function. And basically, this is just going to loop through all of the queries that you have implemented. So like I said, implement as many queries as you can into the prepare search queries, and get as very specific as you can. Like I said, so like really go in depth into like, what is going on within your, so you can have it implemented, so you can know what's going on within your specific niche, like discussions that are being had or news on your recent competitors, for example. So like I said, really get in depth for the prepare search queries, and just have as many implemented as you can and get as specific as possible. So you have a lot of queries to then be looped around within this loop function to then be implemented into the next step, which is going to be our search web function. So I have DuckDuckGo within this specific function, but why? So DuckDuckGo doesn't require any API key usage, and basically, like I said, so you don't have to use any API key usage. So obviously, it's free. You don't have to, like I said, spend any money for API keys, for to have a function that's still capable of searching the web for specific news. And basically, what it's going to do, obviously, from the specific split search queries function and the prepare search queries function, is basically it's going to take the data from those previous two functions, and that's basically what's going to be searched on the web from. So basically, this is just what's going to be responsible for whichever queries you had previously implemented. The search web.go function is just going to be responsible for searching for that on the web without using any API keys. So like I said, you don't have to pay for any API key usage. So that's why I love, DuckDuckGo, and that's why I went with it for this specific function specifically. And then it's going to go to our JavaScript function, and then this is just basically going to analyze, the search results from the previous search web.go function. And basically the JavaScript code is just going to analyze, all of the results that the previous function did look for. It's going to take and analyze all those results, and then it's going to store it into the intelligence data function. So basically it's going to be stored into this PostgreSQL function, and that's basically what's going to be stored inside the database of all the recent search results that were recently provided from the search web.go function, implemented into the JavaScript code function. All the search results were then analyzed, and then it's going to go into this specific database here, our store intelligence data function. So now heading into our bottom branch of the workflow. So basically this is going to be very similar to the middle branch, but basically this is going to be responsible for the ad monitoring and basically the ad searching, for example, of your competitors. So obviously for our first step we have a prepare ad monitoring variable. So basically what I would implement here personally is the names of your competitors, and obviously the platforms, or like try to implement like the platforms of your competitors that they do advertise on, and that basically just implement that data into this specific variable, so it can then move on to the next step, which is going to be our split ad queries function. and obviously, this is the loop function. So basically, whatever you have previously inputted into the prepare ad monitoring variable. So like I said, get very in depth and very detailed within this specific variable here. So you could then, the loop function has a lot of data to then respond to, and then obviously, it's going to loop until all the data is ran through. Then it's going to go into our .go function. It's basically going to search on the web for basically the specific competitors' ads. So whichever platforms they are advertising on, this is basically going to be responsible for looking for that specific data for whichever platforms they are advertising on and extracting the advertising data as well. That's going to go into our JavaScript function. Obviously, then it's just going to analyze your competitors' ads, platforms they advertise on, what the ads are doing, etc. And then it's going to go into our PostgreSQL, and this is just going to be another table that's responsible for storing the advertising data specifically. So like I said, very similar to the middle branch workflow, but this is just specifically going to analyze your competitors' advertising data specifically. So moving into our last final segment within this specific workflow. So we have our JavaScript function here. So we have our generate intelligence alerts function. So basically what I have this set for is basically it's going to compare your data from the database from your PostgreSQL. So from the three different branches, for example. It's going to then compare it to basically like your industry standards within your niche. So basically like if there were a lot of changes made to that specific competitor's business model, then it's going to go into this next function here. So it's basically going to take all the data that was then analyzed by the previous JavaScript function. Then it's going to go into our if function, our requires immediate alert, question mark, and basically what this is going to be responsible for is if there were a lot of changes made to a competitor's business model and that you need to be alerted on immediately, it's then going to go into our send priority alert email function, and you're basically just going to be notified immediately of whatever specific changes that specific competitor made to their business model, and if it was of like really high priority and that you need to be alerted on immediately. So if there were a lot of big changes that were made within that specific industry, you would then be notified immediately of that specific competitor's data, for example. And then if it isn't of high priority, then it's going to then go into our send Slack summary, and then basically this is just going to send you the summary of basically of all the data that was previously implemented from the PostgreSQL databases and then analyzed by the JavaScript function. Then basically all that data is then going to go into this send Slack summary. There's obviously, this is just going to be, a summary that was then obviously, responsible for, all the data that was previously implemented from the PostgreSQL database, and it's just going to be sent to you in a summary. So yeah, that's basically it. But other than that, that is going to be it for today's video. Hope you all enjoyed this video and this workflow, but one thing I do want to make clear here as well is the real key to making this workflow work and really, really stand out and to be as of much use to you as possible is with just having the data implemented into these specific variables like I mentioned earlier. So basically the start of the branches that I did have implemented earlier, like really go in depth into those specific variables and implement as many queries as you possibly can and implement as much data in within these variables as you possibly can. So then you just have so much data to feed within into this specific workflow. So it can then just generate as much data for you as possible. So then you're never, left behind. You don't, feel like you missed out on anything. Just implement as many queries as you possibly can. Whatever question, pops into your mind, please implement it within these specific variables. So that's one thing I did want to point out as well. That's the real key into making this specific workflow just as much value to you and your business as humanly possible. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed this workflow that I built for you all. Like I said, it's very unique. I haven't seen a lot of people build something like this on YouTube as of recently, if at all, to be honest. But I feel like it is of really, really high value to any business out there that's looking to have something like this implemented into their business. But yeah, if you want to have something implemented, something like this into your business, I have my business email down below in the description. But yeah, other than that, that's going to be the end of this video. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next video.